Our next talk is called Job Applications and You, Building Your Resume and Samples. And our speaker is Rachel Williams. Normally a shy and reclusive cryptid, Rachel Noel Williams has successfully integrated with human society and now lives among them peacefully. They love cats, music, nature, and you.
Hey, thanks so much. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Rachel Noel Williams, and I am a narrative writer currently at Riot. I have a background working at Obsidian Entertainment, Telltale Games, and also Blizzard. I'm going to set myself a little timer right here so I make sure that I stay within the constraints of the lightning talk. But this is job applications and you building your resume and samples. So I want to start off by telling you a little bit about who this talk is for. So obviously, you'll get the most benefit if you are a narrative writer or designer or an adjacent discipline, so someone who's in editing, maybe in copywriting, but this should hopefully be information that's good for everyone involved. So beginners, veterans, whether or not you've been in the industry for 10 years and you're maybe looking to get a new job, or if you're someone who's just trying to get in from being a student. Hopefully, we'll be able to cover most of the application materials. Obviously, we are limited by time, but this should give you a good starting point. Um, Let's start off with the resume. So some of this is going to seem like a no-brainer, right? One of the core details for your resume is that we should have your contact information. I know a lot of people tend to leave this stuff out simply because it's at the top of their resume, but obviously we want to be able to get in touch with you. So whether or not that's pertaining to your email, your phone number, please don't give your physical mailing address. Your social media accounts, if those are relevant, or your LinkedIn. So consider updating those things since those are going to be the things that recruiters are going to look at. Work experience is also pertinent to your resume. So your work experience is not just about where you've worked before, but kind of the things that you've worked on as well. So whether you've worked with specific tools in the past or if you've been a lead of a team or something like that, that's going to be significant. And especially if it's pertinent to the job listing itself. So, for example, if someone says, hey, we want someone with 3 years experience working in Python, really great to list that sort of thing here. Think of it as sort of the technical capabilities that you have. And then your education, if you're a student just looking to get into the field, or if you're someone who maybe has some special courses that you've taken, it's really helpful to be able to highlight those things on your resume so that people know where you're kind of coming from with that stuff. There's also a ton of other things that you can include on your resume. Obviously, a lot of people have awards or projects that they've worked on personally. Some of that stuff can be really great, and it's entirely up to you what you want to include. Hopefully, the intent is to keep things brief. So, whether or not you're including things like your projects or personal awards, make sure you're not listing stuff along the lines of, like, hey, I took Kung Fu for 8 years, unless you feel that that's pertinent to the job itself. If you're going to be writing a Kung Fu game, then by all means. Additionally, though, you want to make sure that it's an accurate summation of your skills. Again, this is sort of how the technical aspect of things comes into play. You want to make sure that the things you're talking about are like, hey, I do have X years working on this project, or I do have familiarity with this kind of tool. And you really want to keep these things objective and not subjective. So subjective stuff is going to relate more to soft skills, but we'll get into that in a minute. A lot of people tend to ask with job applications, do you need a portfolio? It's really up to you. When you're first applying to a job, generally the people who are going to be looking at it are the hiring manager and the recruiter. They've got about 10 seconds to a minute, depending on who you ask, to kind of review that material. And if you have a portfolio saying like, hey, here's the game that I worked on, but no context or like your personal role on that project or what you contributed to it, it's going to be very difficult for us to kind of figure out your role on it. And recruiters may not be willing to kind of go the extra mile to ask what pertains to you of that portfolio material. So bear that in mind. But it is a great way to kind of show off your skills and to say, hey, as a summary, as a whole, this is all the things that I've worked on in the past. So, additionally, one of the things that I really want to bring up that's super important is that your resume does not equal a cover letter. A lot of people are saying these days, like, hey, I just submitted my resume or my resume is attached to my LinkedIn, so I don't feel the need to write a cover letter. But they're not the same thing whatsoever. We talked about the technical skills that are associated with your resume. So, think of that as, again, kind of like the brains of the operation, whereas your cover letter is going to be kind of more like the heart of it. So, your cover letter should pertain to the things that make you uniquely you. So, say you've got like great experience, you were a camp counselor for 10 years, and that makes you really good at talking to people and leading and stuff like that. All of that is very subjective and may not be listed in the job application itself. So, it's great to have that kind of stuff on hand in your cover letter. It's also a great way to talk about your passion for the application. So, if you're applying to a company that you're a big fan of, or if you've been playing Blizzard games, no affiliation for the past 20 years, it's a great opportunity to say like, hey, I love Blizzard. You should definitely hire me. And again, these are the subjective qualifications, right? Like you can think of things like being a team player or a good listener or a good communicator as all of those sort of soft skill things. And that's kind of how you want to assign them. So again, just to recap, the technical skills should go into your resume, soft skills should go into your cover letter. So the biggest thing that I wanted to get to in this presentation is samples. A lot of people tend to ask, like, what are the best sort of samples that I should submit for a job application? They really pertain to the kind of job that you're applying to, but all in all, whether or not you're coming from a background in film and TV, or again, if you're a student and you've worked on student projects, all of that stuff is really valuable. You know, you get a chance to show off what you're good at and give us an idea of what you really find interesting. And I do want to kind of like toss it out there really quickly. Sometimes people will want to submit scripts. Again, if you've been in film and TV before and you have these very long scripts, sometimes those need to be truncated. So kind of like consider for yourself what is the most practical and relevant information in that script and be able to kind of highlight that instead of leaving us with a 270-page script, which I guarantee we won't be able to get through in a reasonable amount of time. If you don't have any samples, this is kind of one of the other big things. It's a good opportunity now to consider like, hey, what would I write if I were in the gaming industry? Or what do you find pertinent or interesting of gaming narrative that you would like to be a part of? So if you're writing for comedy games or you think you'd like to be writing for comedy games, for example, Epic has kind of a comedic tone. It's a really great idea to be able to look at comparable titles and then say like, hey, here's how they've done these things. This is the stuff that they do particularly well. I want to be able to write like that. So go and find a sample of the writing that they have and then kind of write to that tonality. You can think of this too in terms of like, hey, you know, I really want to work on one of the biggest FPS games out there right now. Think about writing combat barks or something of like, if you're playing a narrative game with branching opportunities, then think about writing stuff in like Twine, for example. There are a bunch of different softwares out there right now, a lot of tools that are available to people that were not available earlier on. So you can kind of find yourself either writing in ink or Twine or Campfire. There's a bunch of different stuff. Even I think Fungus is available widely now, so you can write for like a visual novel sort of thing. You can also think about writing samples for things that you personally would like to play. So, for example, if you are interested in playing a comedy game, again, write comedy. If you're interested in writing for a very serious narrative game, then go ahead and give that a shot as well. Um, so some of the frequently asked questions that I get is how many samples do I need? Now, that's really up to you. I think that it's very helpful to have a variety of different samples, especially if you're applying to a job where you're not quite sure what the content of the narrative that they're writing is going to pertain to. So 2 to 5 is generally my recommendation. I think also it depends on kind of like the length of those samples. So for example, if you're writing in short fiction, you have a short story that takes up to 15 pages, probably just that. Or if you're going to condense it again, as I mentioned before, very long samples are difficult for us to get through. It'd be really great to have kind of like 2 or 3 pages highlighting what you find to be most relevant to the position. When it comes to other samples, it's really helpful to kind of have it written out as a prelude, like have something at the very front that tells you on this page you'll be able to find this thing, on this page you'll be able to find this thing. And you can list those samples out in terms of like, hey, I've got a YouTube video, for example, of the game that I worked on because the game company is now defunct, or I wasn't able to take the information off of my computer before I left the company, so here's all of the stuff that I have as it pertains to someone's playthrough. What if you have a really great idea for a game? That's awesome. Write it down. That's very helpful. If you're going to be giving us a background for some sort of like world building that you've done, that's super helpful. Again, just try and keep it brief if you can. And then one of the biggest questions that I get often as it pertains to narrative is how do I transition from role A to role B? Well, a lot of the time, the people who are asking this are at a company where there are opportunities for people to move into narrative positions. So that being said, I think there's sort of a bigger answer at hand. But my best suggestion would be A, find a good advocate. Either that's yourself or somebody else at the company who knows you're capable of doing the narrative work. B, try and find a mentor at the company who can help you either get an idea of what tools they're using or what the job actually requires. And then C, try and give yourself an opportunity to like shadow somebody, you know, have an opportunity to look over their shoulders, see what they're doing in the day to day, and then maybe start to try and transition into that position. Obviously, this is very highly dependent on the kind of work that you're doing currently and then the kind of work that you'd be looking to do, as well as the studio itself. But if you're looking to move from A company to B company, then maybe consider what B company is focused on. So that's pretty much it for me. There's my name, there's my email, there's my Twitter. You're free to DM me or send me a message at any point in time. Um, Obviously, I'm working on a couple of different games. I'm going to stop sharing right now. I'm working on a couple of different games right now, so I just wanted to pitch those to you really quickly if I have an opportunity to do so. One of them is Legends of Runeterra. I'm working over at Riot on the free-to-play game, so do check that out. I'm also working on a game called Long Journey to an Uncertain End, which is in development. We're going to be going to our Kickstarter sometime soon. And also, please check out Clam Man 2. That's the sequel to the original Clam Man by Team Clam and Mara Frass, and that'll be out soon as well. So that does it for my talk. We came in at 9 minutes and 55 seconds. I'll actually be available here on stream for Q&A for about 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll be switching over to the Discord. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pitch those into the Twitch chat or over in the Discord channel. Thanks.
There we go. Yeah, so we're going to take about 5 or 10 minutes of questions and then move to Discord. You're getting claps in Twitch chat.
Oh,
so people
thanks.
people liked it. All right, Jeremy Douglas asks, Rachel, can you please repeat the name of the title you're working on? You named a couple, so maybe all of them.
Sure, yeah. I'm working on Legends of Runeterra over at Riot, which is the free-to-play collectible card game, and I'm also working on a game called A Long Journey to an Uncertain End.
I will drop those in chat as well. I'll put those in the
Awesome.
Q&A channel.
Awesome. And I'll actually be sharing the slides for my presentation as well, and that should be included in there.
You said Long Journey to Uncertain End?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll put the... And that's available at longjourneygame.com.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, please put the word question before your question so it's easy for me to see in chat. To be the Anthropic says, I'm new to gaming and thinking about ways to convey what I see as transferable skills, ? So I guess the question is, how do I convey what I see as transferable skills if I'm new?
Got it. I think it pertains a lot to the kind of job experience that you have and whether or not you've worked in the field before, or perhaps you've worked in retail jobs previously. A lot of that stuff ends up being soft skills like customer support, or I think probably working with different teams, different interdisciplinary teams. So all that stuff is super relevant. I think finding a way to maybe review a couple of different job applications and look at some of the positions that you're interested in, see what matches up to you. There may not be a one-to-one exactly, but there should be an opportunity for you to see kind of like ways in with the kind of jobs or the kind of skills that you currently have.
Stefanolofs, I think that's how you say that, asks, do you recommend reaching out to companies even when there's no position posted?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the type of company, whether or not they are a company who focuses on narrative and hires regularly. So if you've seen a lot of job positions posted by them in the past and they've just suddenly shut down, or you know that they're going to be opening one again in the near future, I think it's a great idea to reach out no matter what. But there are companies who basically shut down job applications, then don't have like a general application. So I think those are probably the ones to avoid. But other ones, by all means, I don't think there's any harm in reaching out just to see what the answer is.
Yeah, I guess you never know what they might keep on file until they start looking, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. The Deluxe Tux asks, when someone only looks at your stuff for 10 seconds to a minute, how do you show the breadth of your experience without being long-winded?
Great question. I think there's a way to kind of summarize your experience in ways that you would be able to bullet point. So, for example, the distinction again between your resume and your cover letter. I think cover letter is a great place to kind of like represent all of your interests, passions, stuff like that. That's a great place to kind of get long-winded, right? Like you have an entire page to get their attention and talk to them about like what makes you uniquely qualified for the position. When it comes to your resume though, you really just want to be able to focus on like the absolute minimum as it pertains to the job. So again, looking at a job posting and seeing something along the lines of like, hey, we want someone with X years of experience doing this thing. You can just list on your resume, hey, I've got X experience years doing this thing. I think hopefully that should answer your question, but do feel free to reach out in Discord if you have further questions.
Manpans asks, What do you recommend for amateur writers looking to make a career change? I trained as an actor, now write scripts for my own personal projects, and have a day job that is very much not in the creative field. How much does education factor into your decisions, and do mature applicants face additional challenges if they are new to the field?
I want to make sure that I get to all the aspects of that question. I think for someone who's looking to start out in the field, again, referencing the kind of games that you're interested in writing for is a really great way of going about it. So, for example, say you really love World of Warcraft, you play it all the time. You know, kind of like what their quests look like. So, maybe writing in a format like that to say, hey, I'm just testing out my skills to see, can I write this quest? I also know that there are a couple of resources on Reddit that's like a prompt a day where you end up really like putting yourself to it and seeing how much you can write in a short period of time. I think exercises like that are just super beneficial. There's no understating the or rather overstating the amount of benefit that you'll get from writing consistently. That's one of the things that actually ends up being most beneficial in the field, I think. Um, you mentioned being an actor. You've written scripts for yourself. Would you mind repeating the last part of that question? I just want to make sure I get to all of it.
Yeah, it's how much does education factor into your decisions, and do mature applicants face additional challenges if they are new to the field?
Got it. I think honestly, I haven't seen education play a huge role in people's applications in the past. As someone who has been a hiring manager, I think that I've looked at it just sort of like a nice to have, if that makes sense. If someone's like, "Hey, I was an English major," I say this to someone who is an English major. It's nice to see that sometimes, but it doesn't necessarily like make or break a resume. It's just sort of additional information and kind of like how you were trained and what you might know about writing. As for whether or not veterans may face some sort of I want to say ageism actually, whether or not you're someone who's older and getting into the field for the first time or making a switch over to narrative. I don't think that has to do with too much of the hiring process. I think that there is sometimes an unfair expectation that people who are a little bit older or making that transition may have experience doing leadership positions or management positions, but I don't think that that should bar anybody from having an opportunity in narrative.
Uh, Veal Gamba asks, do you have any tips for someone wanting to transition from programming with a good amount of experience into writing?
Got it. Programming. Um, I think again, putting yourself to the task of writing some writing samples and seeing kind of where you end up with that stuff. Make sure you get feedback from your peers on things like that. If you are in the field already and you do work with writers, it's a great opportunity to go to them and say, hey, I'm interested in making this transition. What do you personally recommend? They may have stuff that's a little bit more pertinent for you as you may be at a particular company that has the kind of narrative you're looking to do. But if you're looking to move over to a different company entirely or looking to do a new form of narrative, think it might be beneficial to just kind of put yourself to it and say, like, this is the kind of writing that I'd like to do. Maybe give it a shot, see where you end up. And again, like run it past your peers, run it past your friends, see what kind of feedback you can solicit from them.
We get a sort of related question from Shion Izzy, who asks, how relevant are freelance writing jobs for gaming news for narrative design jobs? I'm a programmer, so I'm wondering if I should consider doing freelance writing at all, or if I should build my portfolio with my own projects.
Got it. If my understanding of that question is correct, they have experience doing freelance writing in game news. So, like articles.
So I think the question is that right now they're a programmer, and they want to know, should they go looking for freelance games news writing jobs, or should they instead just build out a portfolio of their own projects?
Got it. Got it. Okay. Um, I think for yourself and your personal interests and the kind of writing that you might be looking to do, it might be best to kind of build up some samples with your own personal projects. But any writing is good writing, right? Like you'll have an opportunity to really build up the muscles to do that kind of writing more consistently and under a deadline, which is always really scary, but is a huge part of writing in the industry. Um, I would recommend taking on freelance opportunities just because, like, you never know what may come of them. You may make great contacts from doing something like that as well. So if you're looking to make that transition and this is kind of like your foot in the door, I would definitely recommend pursuing that avenue.
Yeah, I will back you up on that. I got my first professional game writing job because I did a podcast interview with a guy, and then he turned into my boss like 6 months later. So
Awesome.
like
That's awesome.
freelance totally does occasionally lead to real opportunities.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Tuppence Pies asks, multi-page resumes, what's your opinion on the length of resumes versus years of experience?
Ooh, that's a great question. Wow. I think that if you are including the experience on your resume, don't quote me on this one, right? Like take it with a grain of salt. I think there are a lot of people who recommend that you have as many job positions on your resume as you've ever had, right? Like every single job you've ever had, you should list. I'm more of the opinion that you want within the 5 to 8 year range, especially if you've moved from company to company. And again, I say this as someone who has moved from company to company. I have experience at other gaming companies that I no longer list on my resume because A, they're no longer relevant, and B, they are so far behind me that it's not necessarily relevant to the position that I'm generally applying for. Um, I tend to think that if you can keep your resume to a page, that's the good stuff. If you can keep it within 2 pages, that's great. Try not to go over 2 pages, especially if it pertains to kind of like, again, there's a ton of stuff that you can include on your resume. If you have an about me statement and then like what games you're playing or like personal projects that you've done or student projects that you've done, and it just like gets to be really lengthy, maybe pick and choose or simply make sure that it's just formatted in a way where it's really easy to read.
Tormashkis asks, do you think there will be significantly fewer job openings in the gaming industry this year because of the coronavirus thing?
Oh, that's such a personal opinion. I don't know that you should really be basing any decisions about getting into the industry based on my personal opinion. However, I will answer by saying that no, I think there are going to be a lot more opportunities actually because so many people are turning to entertainment while they're stuck at home.
B Neverwhere 25 asks, as someone who's fresh out of university, it's hard to get a job because everyone wants someone with job experience. How do I show them that I'm still good at what I do? The eternal conundrum, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best ways to show off what you're good at doing is either again through like saying, "Hey, I've worked on these student projects, and here's what you can actually see that I've done." So making a twine game, then being like, "You can actually play through this and see what you think of it." And additionally, your samples, like whether or not you've got experience in the gaming industry or you're new to it entirely, I think your samples will be very telling. Um, Certainly, again, if you have people that you can reference and get feedback from, that's always really, really helpful.
Yeah, and it's easier than ever to build up those samples and projects now. It's not like when you had to come out of the mod scene.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And certainly, like having an online community, again, Reddit is a great source for doing like writing prompts. And if you've got friends who are also writers, it's a great opportunity now more than ever when everyone is stuck at home, kind of like form those bonds over the internet and see what people have to say about your writing.
All right, I think this is our last question from chat.
Okay.
It's from Jeremy Douglas. Are there common mistakes in presenting yourself for entry level? I advise graduating college seniors who are often pitching themselves to get in the door to the industry.
Sorry, could you repeat that question? Common
Are
mistakes?
there common mistakes in presenting yourself for entry level? So I guess what are the biggest mistakes you see all the time in this when you're if you're somebody who's reviewing these applications?
Oh, gotcha.
Because
Okay.
they are advising graduating seniors.
Got it. I can tell you outright that one of the things that's really frustrating to see is when somebody lists a bunch of different company names and says, like, I worked here for a year and I worked here for a year and I did all these different projects. And then you look up their information on LinkedIn to just like verify or kind of like get more information about that stuff. And it turns out they were all student projects and they just like named each team that they were part of. Please don't do that. That's really confusing. And especially if the game company never existed, like we're definitely going to want to be able to reference that, especially if we have people over at that company who can kind of like speak to your behalf. Um, Certainly, I think just presenting yourself as a student is fine. Like saying, "Hey, I just graduated from this program. I have an interest in doing this kind of work." Uh, I think showing off your student projects is a great way of going about it, and then making any additional samples or student projects, or even like once you're out of that, doing game jams is a really great idea. So there happens to be a game jam happening at NarraScope. So if you're interested in that.
All right. Well, that's the last one from chat. But if there are more, we can continue in Discord.
Awesome. That sounds great.
All right.
Really
Thank you so
quickly.
much again for that for your talk and the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually wanted a chance to thank the NarraScope team and all the speakers involved. Y'all made a really quick pivot to doing an online conference during a very uncertain time and made a lot of accommodations to be as inclusive and thoughtful as possible. So everyone in chat, be sure to take the time to thank them and take advantage of what's a really robust schedule of talks.